Again, I just want to say welcome to everyone. I'm Pamela Perro. I'll be your facilitator for a little while this afternoon. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for joining us in this virtual space today. And for those of you who are able to use the magic of technology and are joining us from the land, maybe you're sitting in a cabin under a tree, or if you're lucky in a boat, our group humbly asks that you send some of that beautiful energy into this virtual space to help ground us in the conversation we're going to have today. And for those of you who are like me, sitting indoors, and our eyes are looking at the screen, just take a few moments. I'm going to ask you to do this little exercise with me as people join us. I see we're up at 190 people joining. Just like you to sit back for 1 minute, close your eyes, and think about the last time you were out on the land or the water. I want you to think about, what did you hear around you? What were the sounds? What are the smells that you remember? Were you with anyone? Did you have family with you, friends, colleagues? And how did you feel? So as we start today, take a deep breath in. And as we exhale, let's release the stresses of the morning and afternoon. Let's release the fears and the uncertainties that we all experience in our day-to-day lives and in our work. But let's hold on to those good memories, those good smells from the land, and the good relations that we have and that support us. And let's hold those in our heart and in our mind as we start this day off in a good way. So miigwech everyone for going through that little experience with me this morning. And I see we're up at 215 participants. So we don't have you for a very long time today. So what I'm actually going to do is we're together for about an hour and a half. And I'm going to start off the presentation with just a quick explanation of the 3 goals that we have. In an hour and a half that we have together, we are going to introduce the report that is now available out to you on the MakeWay website on the implementation of protected area agreements in northern regions of Canada. We're going to provide an overview of some of those findings of the report. And then most importantly, and what you are all here to hear about are from the voices of the people that are doing this hard work every day. And they're going to share some of their insights and discuss some of their experiences. So before we get started into the more technical aspects of this report, we're going to start with Stephen Ellis from MakeWay. He's going to take the center stage for a little bit and give us a bit of a welcome and introduction to the report.
Thanks, Pam. And I was reflecting about the last time I was on the land. I was just out on the Great Slave Lake here, just outside of Yellowknife where I live. And I brought some Zimbabwean friends of mine who are recent immigrants to the country and had come from the big smoke Toronto and have made the move to Yellowknife for better lives, better careers, and so on. And just the childlike glee that they had to be able to drink water out of the lake without treating it, and catching fish and eating it on the fire. Anyways, great memory. So thanks for bringing me there. And that was just a few days ago. The ice is off our lake very early this year. I'll be quick. My name is Steve Ellis. I'm with MakeWay. MakeWay is a national philanthropic organization. Our mission is to build partnerships and solutions to help nature and communities thrive together. We've got a number of regional and thematic programs across the country. One of them is the Northern program that I help lead. The Northern program provides its programming in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and the rest of Inuit Nunangat, which are the 4 Inuit regions, which include Northern Labrador or Nunatsiavut and Northern Quebec or Nunavik. And we've got staff across the 3 territories doing cool work with cool people in the communities of the north. Sort of the genesis of this report, a few years back, we worked with Firelight and some of our partners in the north who are advancing and negotiating and planning for new Indigenous protected areas. And we're very much at the negotiation, community conservation, or community conversation stage. And we're not yet quite at the point where they'd signed agreements and we're starting to ride this bike that they built together. And at the time, one of the main things that came out of that report was that people were really interested not only in what it takes to establish a protected area in the north in partnership with Indigenous peoples, but also how to implement these things. And really, I think there was a realization amongst many of northern Indigenous communities is that doing the paperwork or doing the negotiations and establishing these areas was a lot of hard work, but actually the real rubber hit the road when these places were established formally, the partnerships were in place and on paper, funding started to flow, and the implementation started. And that's when the real hard work began, even though as if it wasn't hard enough already. So that was kind of the idea behind this report. And we worked with Firelight and a number of our Indigenous partners across the north to get into the details of what it takes to successfully implement these areas. What are some of the barriers? What are some of the key considerations? And it's really interesting to see that we've got really robust participation across the country on this webinar that really sort of is in line with the growing interest in these types of protected areas across the country. I think our first webinar, when we released the first report, had maybe 150 participants. We're getting close to double that now. So I think there's a lot of interest in the implementation of these areas. And it's something that everybody should pay more and more mind to, given that many conversations around Indigenous protected areas are very much at the planning and establishment phase and not necessarily at the implementation phase. And our friends from the Tlitsik First Nation, the Kikitani Inuit Association, and the Kashwagotene Foundation, who will be speaking today, they'll have lots of information to share about best practices, barriers to avoid that they, if they had perfect hindsight, would have designed for in the past, and various solutions that they've put in place to overcome some of their challenges. So mostly good news stories here and lots to share from these few Indigenous protected areas that are well on their way to making what they've agreed to with their partners a reality on the ground. So I'm super excited to hear what everybody has to say, and go check out the report. It's on our website, and hopefully it's useful for those of you that are in the planning phases, in the establishment phases, or even better, in the implementation phases of your protected areas. Thanks, Pam.
Great, thank you, Steve, for that introduction and the good words to get us started. So because we recognize the limitations of a two-dimensional report, text on paper with beautiful but static photos, as Steve mentioned, we thought what we would do is actually invite some people, some representatives of these amazing places to come and to share their experiences. So all people who you will meet today have either been interviewed as part of the report, or they were a part of looking at versions of the report, or even just advisors to MakeWay and Firelight in the process of setting up this research. So what we're going to do is, rather than me simply reading out a bio, what we're going to do is ask each of our speakers to introduce themselves. And they're going to do this by talking about where they come from, but also their relationship to the lands and waters that they work every single day to protect and to make part of, and to share some of their experiences with you. And they've committed to doing that with us today, and we're very grateful. So on the screen, what you'll see in front of you is a map with a short bio that you can read yourself. If you don't have your volume turned up very loud, there's a photo of our speaker. You'll see their beautiful faces soon. And also there's a geographic reference location for the area that they'll be speaking about. So there's an order that we're going to start with. We're going to start with Iris. Kathleen. Then we're going to move to Neil. And then we're going to end with Daniel. And then as we go through the presentation, I've got 3 questions, and we're going to mix up the order a little bit for the speakers. So I'll do my best to keep us in line, but what I'm going to start with is providing lots of space, lots of room for each speaker to share with us some of their story. I'm going to start with Iris. If you could unmute yourself, and the participants are ready to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Iris Catholic. I am so hard to read your bio sometimes, and I'm getting a little frazzled by seeing the amount of participants on there. But anyhow, my name is Iris Catholic. I am a mother of 2 sons. I'm a harvester. I'm a member of the Lutsuket Dene First Nation, and I am the manager for the Thai Dene Nene department. And I oversee the Lutsuket Dene First Nation implementation of our newly established Thai Dene Nene Indigenous Protected Park. Our park is roughly almost 27,000 square kilometers. It's right in the east arm of the Great Slave Lake. I'm not really sure, how long did you want me to speak? Okay, well, I'll just keep going. So with the establishment of Thai Dene Nene, it didn't happen overnight. We've been in negotiations with the federal, with Canada and Ottawa for close to 50 years. There's a long history and story behind that, but I'm not going to get into that. In 2004, our community, led by elders, declared Thai Dene Nene as an Indigenous protected area. And they called it Thai Dene Nene, which in our language means land of the ancestors. In 2019, we signed agreements with the GNWT, as well as the Government of Canada, to create a national park reserve, a territorial protected area, and a wildlife conservation area. So we have 3 different designated parks within Thai Dene Nene. And I guess the vision from our elders and our people to protect all of that land was to protect all of the land, the water, all the animals, and our way of life for our future generations. And a lot of focus is on a thing, what we call Dene Chani in our language. So it's our way of life, who we are as Dene people. We have all different kinds of programs. We have environmental monitoring. We have on-the-land harvesting programs. We have training programs for youth and for our guardians. We do all different kinds of neat things, and sometimes it's hard to describe the amount of things and work that we're doing just in a short period of time, because it's too much. So yeah, I think I'll just stop right there, and then we can go through the rest of the speakers and the report, and then we can look at taking questions after that, if that's okay. Merci.
Thank you, Iris. I appreciate that. Being the first one off the mark is difficult. So thank you for leading us in this introduction. Neil, we have you up next.
Thank you very much, and please feel welcomed. We really appreciate the opportunity to provide this support and to be included in this conversation. Thank you to everyone that's here to watch and listen. We appreciate your time management, and the luxury of this nowadays seems to be being pulled at all angles in all locations, and the challenges that creates sometimes. it's can be overwhelming, but we appreciate the fact that you're here and willing to listen to us. As the biography indicates, I'm Neil Kiguttak. I am the Senior Inuit Stewardship Manager at the Rikaptani Inuit Association. I'm originally from Arctic Bay in Nenisivic, which is in the heart of our current interim protected area called Tadlotiuimanga. The work that I'm doing, I'm the first to occupy this position, but like Iris indicated, the work that Inuit have been doing for Lancaster Sound, as it was originally known, when we incorporated the name to try and tailor it to what Inuit want to use for the establishment of this current interim protected area, Tadloti was the representation of that Northwest Passage along the coasts of Devon Island, which is similar to some of the Inuit tattoos that are on the chin and some of the markings that are in similarity to the Devon Island inlets. Hence the word Tadloti, which is that expression for the tattoos on the chin and some of the facial markings that are similar on that region. We as Inuit have also been advocating to try and adopt the Western practice of creating established areas and protected areas. Although Inuit and First Nations and people native to their land and waters have been doing this as a part of the work that they already do, when looking at countries and the establishments of the work that is being integrated, we understand that we live in a society now where we have to create agreements, we have to create documents and papers and have autographs or signatures and language that speaks to some of the limitations that can be followed, which in our culture, written language was not necessarily recorded across all regions. Not all of the Inuit across all regions wrote. And now we're trying to adapt within the very short time in this new civilization to follow these practices and principles, but also adapt them to the way we practice our culture, as well as the things that we have been passed down to do, which is taking care of our land and waters and using that to incorporate the lifestyles that we live in now, modern societies, when we operate in offices and conduct work in meetings. Unfortunately, like this, we would rather have face-to-face interactions and speak to you about this and interact the way we do in our culture, where we're seeing each other face-to-face and being able to transfer knowledge and share our culture and give that energy that we were so graciously Pamela did a great job introducing that, and abilities to create virtual welcomings. I think you did a great job doing that, so I commend you for that. When it comes to my relationship with Tadlotiuimanga, I just wanted to quickly indicate that, as I indicated, I'm originally from there. So I grew up in the waters, on the ice, traveling and studying the habitat and wildlife, and then relying on the seasonal changes to learn about how different incorporations of our traditional knowledge that I've accumulated in my life. When the opportunity for the federal government to work with QIA happened, I pretty much stopped all the things that I was doing, and with the support of my spouse and my son, we shifted all the priorities we had, because the importance of this work has been happening for so long. The opportunity to contribute to this was, I have so many sleepless nights because I have so much involvement with the work that's happening, and without the support of the people that have created the path for us over the last 5-6 decades, I'm quite honored, but at the same time understand the gravity of the weight that's on my shoulders to try and demonstrate all of the negotiations, all of the work that our elders, my immediate elders, my grandfather and his brother, and the siblings in my family that contributed to this back in the 60s and then again in the 80s, who subsequently actually is working for me now. I'm his supervisor, so it's kind of ironic that my my grandfather's brother is reporting to me when he's my elder. So the dynamics of this are kind of funny that way. He was one of the people that helped negotiate some of the protected areas for Lancaster Sound in the 80s, and now that we have this interim protection, he's actually helping see the fruit of that work and negotiation. And thanks to the work that our elders have done, we are able to speak about this today and hopefully look at long-term protection for this area. I will call it here. There'll be opportunities to talk more about this as we carry out the day. So thank you, and I look forward to the questions that you guys will have. Thank you.
Thank you, MakeWay, for that, Neil. Daniel, if you could unmute yourself. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Daniel Masazumi. I'm the executive director for the. See, just a second here. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name's Daniel Masazumi. I'm the executive director for the Kashotan Foundation, and I've been in this role for about a year and a little bit there. October will be 2 years, October 1st. But before I got into this role here, I was a chief for 2 years, from 2019 to 2022. And before that, I've done a lot of work in our protected area for about a good 15 years. I did a lot of water sampling. And I kind of did that as part of my education to kind of better myself and to being a mentor for future generations. I kind of worked with a lady from the federal government to help me with that. So, but for me, our protected area is a really respectful. It's a respectful place for our future generations, because we as Kashotan, we always share our stories of the sacred areas, burial sites in the area, and so on, as to where it's good for hunting and trapping and fishing and so on. And it's, for me, it's kind of like an everyday thing, sharing those stories. And even today, sharing my story with you too, it's kind of starting a momentum for me, because that's part of our challenge. My challenge is to kind of share my story for others that are trying to do the same thing as to protecting an area. And I feel that one of the main ideas or main goal is to prevent industry from coming into a protected area. As of right now, what we're trying to do is do a lot of research in our area, and we kind of have data. We collect data, and with that data, we're trying to build a story to justify to industry as to why it's not a good idea to do any activity in the area, because of the data we got. And so it's to protect that area is it's very significant to the Kashotan, because they've been talking about it for a long time. And also too, I just wanted to say that, within our area too, we kind of, it's part of our identity as to who we are. And we hold that area very sacred to our heart because of our culture. And we feel that within that area, we kind of, when we're in that area, we kind of feel that, you know, our identity comes to life because of what is being preserved in that area. With our traditional knowledge and our spirituality in the sacred areas that are in that area. And when you're in that area, it all comes together. You have an elder or two with you to tell you the stories of in that area, it kind of really hits home. Especially when you have a recorded music, like say a drum music, you have that playing in that area. We have done it before with our elders. They kind of sang in that area, and so, you know, you could hear the echo. And it kind of brings life to the land because we hold that area really dear to our heart. So from here on, I feel that, you know, we're always finding ways to do research with researchers and as to how we can better manage our area. So I'm kind of out of words for now, but I'll just leave it at that for now. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that introduction, Neil and Iris. And I just wanted to say that your last sentiment there, Daniel, about playing music on the land and the land hearing our voice, it just reminds us all that we are part of the land and the land is part of us. And that very powerful imagery of bringing the drums out and sharing our music with the land, and just as the land shares its music with us, I think that really sits nicely in my heart this morning as I hear the birds outside my window. So Chimigwech for that. So I'm just doing a quick time check for us. We're all at about half past the hour. So we're going to move in now to just a bit of a summary of the findings. So I'm doing this on behalf of the Firelight research team, because sometimes, as we've learned, it takes somebody who is not as close to the work to summarize, and the story will get a little bit shorter because, again, we want the voices of our speakers to be prominent front and center for you today. So again, thank you to the speakers for reminding us again as well that the approach we've taken to document these stories is relatively new to our cultures. We prefer to be out on the land, to be talking with each other, sharing with each other. But also too, we are co-opting, we are taking on and changing and improving upon research practices so that it makes for better decision making, and also too, it helps to share and ensure that lessons learned can be shared widely in formats like this and also into the future generations. So a fundamental aspect and element of our research when we took on this second report looking at IPCAs was to speak with as many different parties as we could that were involved in Indigenous protected and conserved area agreements. So we used a case study method, and we looked at the following agreements: Torngat Mountains, Adajay, excuse me, Thaidenene, Sudene Len, Tuyata, and Talirap Imanga. The findings, we did interviews with people, with key practitioners who were on the land, people who were responsible for implementing and making operational actions come out of these agreements. And then we finished off with a 2-day workshop. So on the first day, you see on the screen, we had numerous parties who were involved in the implementation of the agreements. We had Indigenous federal representatives from all the conservation areas. And on the second day of the workshop, we had just Indigenous representatives that were able to caucus and to share with Firelight and MakeWay some of their lessons learned. Next slide, please. In terms of the findings of the report, we've got 3 findings. We'll start with the roles. So please, again, if you've got the link to the report is quite lengthy. The beginning is the narrative, and we've put all of the specific case studies in an appendix at the end. So please read right to the very end of the report. But the narrative, the story line is the body of the report. So we'll start with the findings around roles. So you can see we looked at a number of categories when we thought about how are we going to implement these agreements. So the people in the positions, and we had different categories. We're looking at the administrative roles, the people that were on the ground, on the land. We looked at all the planning and permitting requirements that were required, all the policy making, management, leadership, and governance, the decision makers. We looked at legal support. And then there were a lot of other roles that were mentioned and brought into the conversation. But what was clear is that all the parties identified that new roles had to be developed. All parties needed staff to carry out administrative tasks that they had never done before. For example, a major role for particularly the Indigenous participants in the project were the on-the-land guardians that were becoming or known as Inuit stewards. But it's not a new role in terms of it had never been done before, but it was a role that also had a lot of other administrative planning and policy making responsibilities tied to it. So the team that was required for guardians to be on the land was much larger. They also had guardians that were carried out very specific tasks that were identified in the co-management board, and they had to keep, as we know through our guardian work, keep eyes on the land. So the reporting structures, the interactions were with a large group of people. So these were roles that were quite important, that were fairly new. We also collected, the guardians and other people on the ground collected data to collaborate with public governments, natural resource officers, and also other on the ground staff. There was an important role for someone working on communications. There's a really important aspect of communicating what we're doing. So communications became an important aspect of guardians and implementation of agreements. It was important for them to have all participants, for them to have their own messaging that went out to the community and to let the community know what was going on in the protected area and to invite community to support the work in the protected area. So the graphic you have in front of us is just a representation of in the research report where we found some of the new roles and where roles had to be expanded. And you'll see the greater number of icons or of people under each of the categories shows where we saw a great expansion of requirements. So people on the land, which is a great outcome from the implementation of a protected area agreement. The next finding we have, of course, there's always challenges. A lot of our work that we do in this area is around identifying challenges, but also working through them and coming to solutions. So some of the challenges that we noted were some of the inflexibility of funding. This is a really common theme that started off in the first report that was done. But what people continue to talk about with us is that it was difficult to reallocate funds once budgets are set. And but now that there's a better understanding of where the money needs to go. So as time goes on, while the original challenges were to reallocate funds because of the type of agreement, people, as time went on, were getting better at understanding where funds needed to go. So they were able to plan in a more effective and efficient manner. Infrastructure in remote locations is always difficult. And this can limit some of the opportunities. So for example, it can limit available housing or office space for staff. So the idea of build it and they will come, the opportunities for inviting guardians, for inviting people to work on the land, or for inviting staff who are on the policy or communication side to be on the land in the region. That is the good intention. But if we had limited housing and if there's limited office space, it's actually difficult to implement. So it also had an impact on educational opportunities for community members that were seeking employment and safety networks as well. So that was another challenge that was noted. Some of the existing structures, and what we mean by that is that the new systems that have to be developed and integrated into the existing systems were difficult. So for example, how do you permit for both public and the Indigenous government? So when you needed to put together a permitting system, who is going to be part of that process? New legislation had to be created and had to be consistent with the existing legislation, that harmonization process. And sometimes going through that process, we found that there was inconsistencies that arose before and after implementation. So figuring out ways to even just look at the paperwork and looking at the agreements and all of the legislation that was required and the new legislation that had to be developed, harmonizing and bringing those into alignment was difficult. Another aspect, another challenge we found is passing on the program knowledge. So incoming staff needed to have a good understanding of the history of the decisions that were made, the programs that were developed, and how to overcome the challenges that had already been identified. So again, we all experience the turnover in our programs, and as time goes on, the responsibility of passing on how those programs started, the history and the lessons learned, that becomes a challenge of making sure that is part of the transfer process. So those are just some of the challenges that we're highlighting for you today. Again, I encourage you to go to the report and to find more details on each of those. With every challenge, we always want to talk about the successes. So we have the foundation of success, and we have the star representation. And what we're going to start with is a focus on Indigenous connection. So what we found is that the purpose of an IPCA is to protect Indigenous values, to reconnect and to connect with the land. And also it's a drive for Indigenous governance. It becomes a driver, it's a facility, it is a mechanism, and it can become a framework for making decisions on the land. So it's the focus is to be on Indigenous connection. That's one of the foundations of success. Another one, of course, is communications. We talked about the challenge. Communication between parties and within parties. The more focus you can put on that, the upfront dedication to ensuring communication is a priority, is a foundation for success. Another successful factor that contributes to success is being pre-planned and taking a phased approach. When we look at the idea of an IPCA, we can be talking 5, 10, 15 years of work, it can become overwhelming and sometimes crippling to even individuals, to small teams, and to people that are looking to do this work and are very focused on supporting and carrying on this responsibility for the communities. So what we have heard from others is that in order to do this work, pre-plan as much as possible, take a phased approach, develop internal processes first, focus on the internal, focus on what your team needs, and then hire top-level positions and build programs. But think internally first, rather than focusing on what is happening around you. Another finding or a foundation of success is having patience and being flexible. Public governments need to allow Indigenous parties to lead the implementation process. And all parties have to have the patience to allow each other to build their capacity. So this is a message that we're pushing out to governments, to public governments, that patience and flexibility are important. But also, this success factor is telling us that as Indigenous peoples, be patient and gentle with ourselves as well. Another factor that came to us in this research is to learn from others. It's important that governments, Indigenous governments and organizations take the time to learn from others who have already been implementing agreements. Whenever possible, share those agreements, and please open your generous heart and share tools that have helped you implement those agreements. So that's what we have learned have been another factor of the success, is learning from others and sharing. Building up community members. The community itself needs to be equipped to take on the necessary roles to carry out these activities. So by that, we mean that communities as individuals, and from today, what you'll hear more from is our participants who, as individual people, carry on their shoulders the great responsibility of implementing these agreements, of designing work plans, of pulling teams together, including funds to support the important work that needs to happen. So what do we need in focusing on the positive support mechanisms and the positive tools and positive environments for those members to carry out this work? That's a foundation of success. And then finally, getting to a common understanding of the agreement. All parties know what is in the agreement, the black and white, two-dimensional aspect of text on paper. We can all read it, but through communication, through relationship building, we have to come to a common understanding of the interpretation of what that agreement means. So again, when the time is taken and when the effort is made by all parties to come to that common understanding, success happens. Next slide, please. So that is just a quick summary of the long paper that you have access to. And we're going to move now back to the speakers. And again, we've got 3 questions that each of them are going to take a bit of time to answer and to reflect back to you as participants. And we're welcoming questions. I see that our chat room is fairly lively. We've got staff from MakeWay that are coordinating some of the questions, bringing some of the questions together. And what we're going to do is give the speakers time to go through each of these questions. And then I've got time reserved at the end for audience questions. So that's how we'll finish off the next 30 minutes or so. So the first question we have And we've got Neil is going to be the first one to take a stab at this one. So if you want to unspotlight me, and Neil, if you can get prepared to answer this, the question we have for you is, what do you know now that you wish you would have known when you started off this important work?
Can we time travel and figure out how to go back and just give me the information I have now to answer that question, because it's a pretty big one. Thank you, Pamela, for that. First off, I'm going to break it down into two parts. What I'll do is talk about what I know about my work. So with the work that I'm doing, I know that I mentioned this, but we have a long history of the work that's led up to this as Inuit, the connection that we have, the reliance of all the ecosystems and patterns that we see from the fluctuations in the natural cycles, and the concerns that people from the outside might have and demonstrate that populations are too dangerous, and changing the statuses with Sarah, or being able to indicate, okay, you know what, we need to flag this and potentially restrict harvesting. Striving for long-term protection obviously is one of the things that we would like to do moving forward with the work that we're continuing to progress. When it comes to the work, accumulating all the things that we understand with what we've done in the last 3.5 years, one of the biggest things that come to my mind, I wish I had the opportunity to speak with some of the elders that have passed in the last couple of years and tap into the oral teachings and history and natural patterns and cycles that they know about in the surrounding area of my current protected area that I'm managing for Tadlo'o-Te-Uimanga, and being able to dedicate time to speak to them, to allow time to record observations and historical teachings that they've been provided, so that we're able to expand the work that we're doing now, which is similar to what we heard Daniel say in terms of the research and monitoring that we are also doing to try and incorporate the comparisons and the Western science and the industry that surrounds that. When we take teachings and practices, we are not taught in a way to criticize, to question, to ask certain questions about why. And a lot of times these may be in conflict with some of the approaches that the science world, you break things down and you ask questions to try and determine whether that's true. And things don't always work out that way with the traditional teachings and practices that we have. So if I could, when you look at the question, traditional knowledge, I think, would have been the biggest source of understanding that I would have liked to have tapped into when I started the work I'm doing. But I feel like the life experiences I've had from the diversity of the work that I've exposed myself to and have been privileged to deal with, that has all tied into the ability to create the work that I've done through the support of our team and the organization that is leading this, which is QIA. We're always trying to adapt and incorporate the work that we're doing. So an accumulation of all that, I think, is challenging. But if I can travel back, I would record information and start writing stuff down, because that's the language that we're going to be using when we talk about negotiations for creating more protected areas and establishing new approaches. And with the history of oral traditions and oral teachings, unfortunately, we have to try and figure out ways to try and speak the language of the people that are supporting the negotiations that we're dealing with. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. Danny, we have you up next, and I'll just remind you of the question. What are the things you know now about your role that you wish you would have known at the start? Can you hear us, Daniel? Oh, Daniel, I think you're, there you go. You're
Yeah,
off.
I'm just having a little bit of a hard time here trying to unmute myself. Yes, okay, there we go. Okay, the question there, it's I've been really trying to wrap my mind around how to answer it as simply as I can. For me, it's kind of like you have to change your frame of mind as to how you think. You have to think like an elder. You have to think like an Indigenous person. And you got to think outside of a colonial way of thinking. And I always hear that from our elders when I speak to them. And one of the other challenges is that what I come across is where we're located in Northwest Territories. And it's because I'm speaking to you right now and you're kind of wondering, you know, where is this guy coming from? I mean, where is he speaking about? What is he, you know? We live, you know, just below about 20 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle along the Mackenzie River. And we're an isolated community of, say, about there's about 900 people in that community. Supposed to be 900 people, but there's 700 there right now. And the rest are outside the community. And some of the things that I come across that I never, you know, I should have known that, you know, public speaking, public and sharing, and public appearances, you know, like for me, I should have known. I didn't know this until until after I got into this role, because now I'm sharing it with you guys, and it's a momentum for me to kind of share my story so others can kind of follow suit as to how we did our protected area. And some of the other issues we have is the complexity with research and government. Because once we come across paperwork, it's always explaining ourselves or negotiating with researchers, negotiating with government, that, you know, we want to get out of the colonial way of doing things. We want to do it in a Kashotan way. This is where we're coming from. Those are the kind of things that we always come across. So even to this day, working on our management plan, we always put the Kashotan laws first before a colonial law comes into place. Our elders that are sitting on our management board, they're the ones that make decisions for us. They're the ones that kind of use the Dena law to make things happen in our way. So I kind of I'll just leave it at that for now, but thanks for listening.
Thank you for that, Daniel. And you are right. It's a big group of people. Again, we have 250 participants on with us today. And again, we thank all of you for joining us and staying with us through through this conversation. Our last speaker on this question is Iris. And Iris, what are the things that you know now that you wish you would have known at the start?
That's a funny question. I think, I guess to put it in context, when I first started working in this position, I was the very first hire. So this was in, right after the signing of the establishment agreement in 2019. And I guess one of the things that I wish I had known then is like the amount of capacity and the amount of work and the amount of effort and commitment that was needed to get the department going, to get things that are in the establishment agreements to happen. I guess when we started implementation from the signing, there was a lot of work. We didn't have an office, having to acquire assets, furniture, even an office, equipment, staffing our guardians. All of that had to happen really quickly. Working with communicating what we're doing with the public, because everybody wants to know what you're doing all the time. So really trying to ramp up and improving communications with not only the public, but your members, your elders. Changing a part-time guardian program to a full-time guardian program with, double the amount of staff, was, having to do all those work plans, navigating. I guess one of the key things too that we always have to try and think about is, because we have only so much capacity and so much time, especially in the summer, is like we really kind of have to navigate who and what kind of type of work, aka research, data collection, what do we want to focus on, because we only have so much time, right? And we only have so much people. So really trying to understand what your, I guess because we work with so many different organizations, we work with our members, we work with our elders, we work with our team, we work with, different governments like Parks Canada, GNWT, ENR. We have, multiple not agreements, but partnerships with different universities across Canada. There's business interests, economic opportunities, tourism opportunities, and just kind of knowing where you need to kind of focus a lot of your efforts and figuring out what you can and cannot do. And figuring out what you can and cannot do for time helps you along with your work plans throughout the year. So yeah, establishing, we had to establish our management board. We had to hire staff. We have to deal with all of these different processes. Now that we have a management board in place, they deal with all of the permitting, and the management board in itself is establishing a management plan, but at the same time creating their own governance policies and procedures that are guiding principles also for us and our team. So everything is ever evolving, and the implementation of that, if I had known in the beginning how much work, I probably would have fought for some more administrative support in the beginning, instead of having to do 10 jobs all at the same time. So that's all I have to add for that one. Mussy.
Thank you very much for that, Iris. And I just wanted to note that Iris did not say, if I would have known all the work, I would have walked away. What I so appreciate, if I would have known all the work, I would have fought harder. And I think that really just speaks to the spirit and the intent and the love that our speakers have for their work, for the people, and for the land. So thank you for that, Iris. And it's you've also laid the foundation. All of you have laid a good foundation. You've introduced some of the things that you didn't know about. So we're going to talk about question number 2 now. So question number 2 is, what are some of the trickiest aspects So things that you've already probably introduced to us, what have been some of the trickiest aspects of the IPCA management, and how did you overcome these? So tricky, I think tricky is our word for the day. What has been tricky for you in the management process, and how did you overcome? So Iris, you're first up, and you can maybe continue on from the great flow that you started. Thank you.
So I guess one of the trickiest aspects of implementing, and establish an agreement for the implementation of an Indigenous park is actually knowing your agreements. So Litsuke is unique in that we have two different agreements with the government of the Northwest Territories and Parks Canada, but also there are other signatories, other parties that also have agreements, which are quite similar to ours. So not only do you have to know your agreement, you also have to understand the other parties' agreements and, like what they've signed on and what their visions are. So knowing those, you have to know those agreements in and out. And basically, sometimes I feel like me and my senior advisor, Steve, are like, we're mom and dad to these agreements, because we're always reminding the parties and even government officials of the promises that were made in those agreements. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we agreed to is making sure that all of the positions within Parks Canada and GNWT ENR are actually located in Litsuke. So the people that are hired to work for Parks Canada under the TDN file have to live and work in Litsuke. But one of the challenges we're having right now is that there's no housing, right? So the people that are hired now are working remotely from Yellowknife and then going back and forth until we figure out housing. And so that's a whole other, that's a whole other issue. But knowing those agreements in and out and, advocating and fighting for these promises that were made to come to pass is something that we do like on a weekly basis, basically. And then also making sure that your members, your community, your leaders, your staff, all of your partners also understand what those agreements are, and because they lead into your guiding principles for the work that you need to do and the work that you need to get done. So I guess one of the other challenges that we have with that is communication. And so we try to create, workshops where we're on the land with our elders and our team and our staff to work on our different work plans and challenges that we have throughout the year. And always going back to your guiding principles, which are your agreements, is something that we try to do. We've created different types of tools to summarize those agreements into, a very abbreviated form. And we try to communicate that with different tools, with our webpage, with, different brochures. When we have visitor engagement, we talk to our visitors about our guiding principles of our Dene laws and what they are, things like that. So that's all I have. Must-see.
Thank you very much, Iris. Neil, we have you up next. So again, a reminder of the question: what are the trickiest aspects of IPCA management, and how do you overcome these?
Thank you, Pamela. Iris, to echo what you said, I'm the first to occupy my role since the fall of 2019 for the contribution agreement for Dadlawatu Imanga Inuit Impact Benefit Agreement. So you and I were taking on the daunting work of building something that wasn't there and creating new policies, procedures, co-management boards, subsequent management boards and committees, working groups, and the list goes on. So my empathies to you, because I understand. following major interactions and engagement like this. My inbox on a good day is 80 new emails. On a bad day, it's over 200 emails. And I, over the last week, have talked to IT requesting to make my Outlook inbox unlimited because I literally cannot get any more emails in or out. So the administrative burden is very, very high. And unfortunately, depending on the roles that we occupy, we're the ones that have to manage that workload. So much of it can only be offset and taken care of by our support staff. Since the creation of the IIBA for Tadlotuimanga, QI was not previously focused on conservation-led work, negotiations, and community representations of the 13 the organization is responsible for. This is the first time that a department was created, Marine and Wildlife, to focus on protected areas and conservation-led work. And like Iris, I was the first to occupy the role I'm doing. And I anticipated that someone was going to bring it up, so I didn't answer that first question in the way I did because I was hoping that someone like Iris was going to say it because we would have been saying very similar things. So I'm glad that you mentioned some of the challenges you faced. I'm not saying that I'm happy you went through them, but I'm glad that someone spoke about them because I think we all have the same challenges when it comes to that from an establishment perspective. To answer the question, Pamela, it's a mouthful. There are, because we're new, I know that 3.5 years is 3.5 years, but I still feel like we're just getting on our feet. And earlier, right before we hit the record button, one of the things that we talked about with MakeWay and Steve Ellis was mentioning this is the challenges of delaying the impacts of COVID and the global pandemic really impacted our ability to continue our work. Some of us were blessed, if you will, to have the requirement and the workload that we did to come to work and have dedicated space and not work from home. And some of the successes I had was because of the fact that, like Iris was mentioning, we had offices, we had infrastructure in place, we have staff, we have computers, we have modems or internet, we have sources to create these communication methods that we rely on. But the sheer diversity of the challenges that we face with establishing new guidelines and principles and conflicting mandates and agreements that don't care about global pandemics and the outcomes and deadlines that are set in stone because it's in that contract. Unless a contract is revised to accommodate these things, the deliverables are still there. We have to try and still meet those demands. We still have to create zoning areas and restrictions and levels of authority and distributions around who manages it, as well as patrolling, providing food security, supporting community-based search and rescue, doing data collection when we're not supposed to be interacting with each other when we had COVID restrictions. Yet we had an increase in food security and food sovereignty. So we essentially became unrecognized essential service workers. Our staff had to ramp up the amount of harvesting activity they did so that they could put food at every doorstep, provide ice for water sources when infrastructure and blizzards hampered the ability to deliver water, to be able to physically go out and get fuel for the equipment so that staff can provide that basic need for our communities. Incorporating traditional practices into the office setting, to the environments that we're creating that are now full-time jobs. We've technically created tailor-made jobs for our staff and creating full-time and intermittent positions. We don't have, well, when we first started, the pilot program that was in Arctic Bay had 7 staff. And with a department that was recently created, and when I first occupied it, there was about 9 of us in total that occupied this department that had been created in the fall of 2019. Now, with the work I'm doing alone, there's about 30 Inuit stewards. And by the end of the year, we anticipate to have over 50 from one community from the pilot project to 5 impacted communities for the Dalhousie National Marine Conservation Area. And now 3 new expansion communities expanding the work that we're doing and have been doing. So being able to manage multiple communities, conflicting priorities, mandated obligations, community priorities compared to mandates and the deadlines that we have to achieve. Being able to maintain the relationships, the communication methods, working with our partners, managing our time to dedicate work to support the advancement of all of our files, onboarding our staff that we work with, because we're getting to the point where we want to reduce the ability to you know, we don't want to work in silos. We don't want communication gaps to impact the challenges that our team members may not be included in. And the way that we've so far have been able to overcome all of these diversified challenges that we faced is the relationship that we have with the government. We work with Parks Canada primarily. We also work with DFO as well as Transport Canada, and with these federal government partners, their respective authorities and ability to tap into the resources that they have within their respective divisions and regions. They've been crucial to the work that we have and our successes, because we're all able to post negotiation. There's still enough members involved that were in the negotiation table that have carried the spirit of the negotiation forward as we try to establish the visions of what, you know, current organization and current government negotiated, with the history of what Inuit had long sought for, as well as the people that were not Inuit that advocated for this. So one of the biggest things that can take that a step even further, for question number 2, in looking ahead on how we can look ahead to overcome these things, is to go back to exchange programs, knowledge transfers, being able to have our staff go to your community, hear about how you do your programs, integrate challenges that you've experienced, that we've also experienced, and tried to brainstorm ways that, you know, we can do a knowledge share and incorporate our culture and teachings into the work that you're doing, and have you do the same for us when you travel to our communities and see how our operations are happening, and help you connect with the environment and the ecosystems and all of the wildlife that we rely on, and be able to look at succession planning so that we can all help each other, because we're all trying to do the same thing. And it would be a sin to try and duplicate work when someone has been, you know, they've solved the equation, they've solved the problem, and now we're trying to get introduced to that and trying to start that whole process when someone's already taken care of that. So it'd be great to look ahead and be able to take that a step further and go back to the opportunities that we've had in the past with people like MakeWay and the support staff that had created these opportunities in the summer of 2019. So these are the opportunities that we'd love to be able to have with you moving forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Neil. You mentioned your email inbox on a good day is 80. I think I heard an invitation to come and share. Your email inbox probably will be increasing a little bit more today. Please take that as a good sign. Next, we have Daniel. A reminder of the question: what are the tricky aspects of the IPCA management, and how have you overcome these?
for us, it's we're in a partnership with the GNWT, and that's kind of a tricky thing for us. And also building capacity in the community, and also infrastructure. So those are kind of tricky in a way. And also too, when we're, you know, like we're passing off documents, fundings, and we always have to trust our partner that, you know, what we ask for is gonna be done in good spirit. Because sometimes it may turn against us, but then again, it's like for us, we're kind of, I feel that, you know, we're kind of paving the way for others to kind of follow suit in partnership with a GNWT. And also, I don't have really very much to say, but just when we start something, it's like we don't really expect anything from those who talk, or those. I'm just kind of tongue-tied here. We don't expect anything in return from others, like youth and elders, because of the compassion with others and the flexibility with others, because it's like it's just the way we are. We always try to give good, and in return, sometimes we get something good in return. I feel that's in our way. That's how we do things. That's in our culture to do those kind of things. And also, I kind of was just thinking here, like what the other speakers were saying. They kind of mentioned a lot of what I wanted to say, but overcoming these kind of things, it's kind of you really, I guess sometimes you really have to get advice from lawyers and consultants and people that know the business of these things, and also from us, because sometimes you may walk into something that you never know the outcome of it. So I guess it's just sharing knowledge is how we overcome things like this. I'll just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. You're going to be the first up for our last question. So we'll keep that finger on the unmute button, but I just wanted to say thank you for a short word that has really big meaning. And you mentioned the word trust, trusting in your partnerships. And the other word that you said was compassion. And I think that those two words have really big meanings, and the intention behind those is again something that difficult to communicate in a report, but I think hearing you say it out loud and putting it in the context of your own experience is valuable to us who are listening to you. So the third and final question we have for our speakers today, and Daniel will continue with you, is what has been your greatest success and source of strength? So what has been your greatest success and source of strength in your work?
I was just kind of jotting down some things there that I should say, but I guess it's sometimes when you're, when you do something and you complete something and you get that joy and conviction you know, the work of not only yourself, from your team. And you're not doing it only for yourself and your team. You're also honoring your ancestors and the elders that help you build something that's good for the future, for our youth. And our team is really good and great, even though sometimes they may have problems. We always overcome our problems. We kind of work together to put the bad aside and put the good in and kind of move forward. And we do it as a team. And we're honest about, you know, what's bothering us and so on. That way we can always be helpful with one another. And I just want to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Iris, we have you up next. What has been your greatest success and source of strength?
I think my greatest success and in the work that I do and what I see is when I have young people, when I have youth coming up to me that are, you know, 12 to 15 years old saying, how do I become a guardian? I want to work for you. I want to be involved in the things that you guys are doing on the land. When are you going to have another youth and elder camp? You know, I get this type of request all the time from young people. And for me to see their interests and I guess the genuine love to get back to our traditional roots and our traditional teachings, and to be able to provide like that safe space between elders and youth and our guardians and our, you know, our harvesters. And to see the young people like always want to be involved is for me, I think it's amazing. I know I'm doing something right if young people that are that young are coming to me to say, I want to come work for you. I'm like, well, you can't come work for me until you graduate and you have a SIN number because these kids are young, right? So yeah, and you know, like building our team, you know, mentoring my team, seeing all of our staff grow individually, you know, with the different levels of professional development, celebrating my team. I try to celebrate and thank my team, you know, all the time for the hard work that they do. Being a guardian is not easy, you know, like they travel thousands of kilometers during the winter months for our caribou monitoring program, you know, 50 below weather. Stuff like that's not easy. There's a lot of time away from their families and things like that. So I appreciate, you know, the vested interest that I have that for everybody that work with, and that goes right from our staff to our partners to our contractors to our board of directors, and our different committees. And yeah, so being able to celebrate your team and being able to see, I guess, the youth when they're really passionate about something and they want to see something, they don't stop bugging you. They bug you all the time. So, you know, we try to create, you know, programs to harvest some of that interest. I guess my source of strength is, you know, family. And, you know, the traditional teachings that I was very fortunate to have. I come from a very large family, but a lot of my life has been spent on the land with my grandparents and my aunts and my uncles. So at an early age, I learned how to be a harvester and to navigate. Back in those days, we didn't have the technology that we use now. When you're learning how to, I guess, navigate different parts of your traditional territory, back in those old days, Grandpa always said, look forward and then look behind. You always had to do that check and balance thing to make sure you were going in the right direction and navigating by the stars. you know, those traditional teachings we're still incorporating with like navigation, GPS mapping, in-reach training with our staff and, you know, all the young people that we hire. So, you know, incorporating those traditional teachings with the work that I do every day is something that is important to me. I guess one of those other teachings that I have is knowing it's your responsibility as a parent and as a person that has any kind of traditional knowledge. It's your responsibility to take that knowledge and to pass it on to younger generations so they're able to go on and keep going even when you're long gone, because we're not all going to be here forever. But you know, a lot of our history, a lot of our knowledge bases have been lost, forgotten, and are being relearned, not only by my generation, but younger generations due to, you know, residential school. You know, language is something that we're trying to really try to figure out ways to keep going. And seeing our youth and our elders interact and passing of those traditional teachings, and seeing, you know, young people, once they learn something, to start carrying that out and that teaching on their own is something that I know at the end of the day, I'm doing something right. If I can pass one teaching to another individual and they start doing it and they start practicing it and they start celebrating it, then I know I can go home and say, yeah, so I saw something really cool today. So yeah, that's all I have for this question. Let's see.
Thank you very much for that, Iris. And we have Neil, final respondent to what has been your greatest success and source of strength.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Iris, for saying some of the things that you did, as well as Daniel for traditional teachings and importance of the work that we try to pass on and carry forward. First of all, some of the successes that we have to recognize within Nunavut are some of the amazing work that our forefathers and mothers have done to negotiate and create the Nunavut Agreement. The rights that we have, the agreement, and the language that's within the Nunavut Agreement is the foundation for everything that we've been able to carry forward, with obligations and rights that we have and hold. And then without QIA support, we would not have been able to do this, because the team that took part in the negotiations are the foundation of our success. Had the team that did the negotiation in that really amazing short timeline, yes, there was a lot of history leading up to it and a lot of feasibility study and work that had been done historically to support the negotiation and the direction that had happened. But some of the crucial steps within the 18-month timeline that the negotiation team was able to succeed, incorporating the scale of the protected area from 50,000+ square kilometers to over 100,000 square kilometers for the same protected area. These kinds of changes would not have happened had not the team been so well coordinated. Yes, it's a negotiation where it's two tables where you're on one side and the negotiation has to have another side where we're trying to come to the same page on what is going to take place and how much money will be devoted to it, and the expectations of the deliverables within contract that will be signed. But with all that, had not the amount of work that was accumulated, that was interpreted and argued and advocated for by both sides of the negotiation table, had that not success been as great as it is now, we would not have had the opportunity to use the flexibility of being given and granted the authority within QIA to create, mend, and mold the way we want to. And an example of that is the ability to create job descriptions to staff and build the team that we have now, and create opportunities where we're not making limitations. We have now the Inuit stewards that range from 18 years old that dropped out of school to over 70 years old that retired almost a decade previous, that came to work because they were so devoted to the work that is taking place, thanks to the work that came out of the negotiations and this interim protection. We have the ability to write job description and do interviews where we don't need people that had former career experience, that don't have diplomas or specific certificates that, quote unquote, qualify for these jobs. They can be unilingual and only speak Inuktitut, and aren't required to build these language skills and administrative and writing skills to do their job. And this kind of flexibility, as an example, is one of the reasons why we've been able to grow so fast, so successfully, and demonstrate the success of what happens when government is able to provide Inuit organizations such as QIA the ability to have flexibility and free rein to demonstrate that when given the opportunity, we're able to prove that we're able to move following our communities and our traditional practices and the needs that we already understand and know. And I'm going to just take a moment and maybe make her feel a bit uncomfortable, but Roseanne was a part of the team that helped make all this happen, and she's on this call. So I just want to say thank you to Roseanne, who's on the line with us. Thank you for all the work that you did in the past leading up to this, and supporting the work that we've done leading up to this, and the successes that I'm echoing on behalf of QIA. And it's a huge honor to be able to speak on behalf of an organization that's doing this work. And like Iris is alluding to, it's really easy to be proud of this. When people are literally jealous that we have indeterminate staff that occupy these roles and are doing the work that our ancestors have been trying to achieve for so long, they are jealous that they're the ones occupying these amazing opportunities. Those are the things that we look forward to, because we know that this is going to be a practice that is going to be carried out in all communities. And the perspective that we've always had is the ability to try and create a path and a practice that it will be able to have the foundation be carried over, so that all communities that have an interest in this can advocate and demonstrate the work that they're able to also do using the work that we're doing now and trying to improve on. I just want to make sure that I had indicated the notes that I wanted to talk about for this before I turn the microphone off. One of the things that Daniel mentioned that I wanted to highlight on this is the ability when traveling, patrolling, conducting harvesting activities, doing research, taking part in major events that happen on an annual basis, such as the annual dog team races, where it's a community to community travel, being able to support search and rescue obligations where our staff, men and women, are going out in every condition throughout the entire year. All of the information that we gather, we have the flexibility of being able to share the knowledge as we accumulate it, as we collect it, instead of having to do 3 to 5 year studies and data collection to create a report that has to go through a peer review and approval process before we create findings and final reports. Yes, we do develop these reports, but the ability to share that knowledge and maintain our guiding principles as Inuit and people living in the territory, the foundations that we have, and the ability to use this now in an established program where we have indeterminate jobs. This is what our job is now. It's an amazing time to be involved in this, and it's very easy to be motivated to want to find ways to improve and expand the time that we're doing this. So thank you for being able to give us time to expand and giving me the ability to speak about the work that we're doing. And we were always looking for people that want to try and contribute to the work we're doing. So if you have a lot of specific experience that you feel that could be tied into this, we'd love to hear what you guys would like to do to be involved in the incorporation of the work we're doing. And that goes out to Daniel, Iris, Pamela, MakeWay. You guys have been crucial to this. So thank you so much for all the work that you guys do to support us. And for everyone attending, thank you for your time and being able to listen to what we have to say. And we look forward to the questions that come from this.
Well, thank you very much, Neil, Daniel, and Iris, for taking the time, sharing your stories, speaking from the heart, and really pulling back the curtains and exposing all of us to some of your day-to-day work and some of the challenges and thoughts and dreams that keep you awake and that also keep you going. And we really appreciate that. So we're over time. For all of you still with us today, I promised an hour and a half. As usual, we're running late, but that's how it is. Sitting around the campfire, sitting around the table, having conversation. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Steve from MakeWay and for some closing remarks. And with that, I want to say Chimigwech and thank you very much. Steve?
Thanks, Pam. And I'll just keep it super, super brief as well, because we're way over time. But I think just the real power in having Indigenous peoples share amongst themselves on their sort of real life challenges and successes around, I mean, we call this, Indigenous protected area implementation, but it's really about community building. And I think that's really the stories that everybody has shared. This is a pathway to, youth engagement and cultural revitalization and sustainable livelihoods and caretaking land and water, all these sorts of things that have always been important in communities, and implementing these new protected areas in partnership with public governments is a pathway that Indigenous communities are using these days to achieve these types of objectives. And I just can't stress enough the importance of people like Neil, Danny, Iris, talking to each other and sharing their knowledge with others. It's kind of like the rising tide raises all boats. So learning from each other and supporting each other as much as possible is definitely a pathway forward. So nobody should ever make the mistakes that IPCA Dene First Nation made 50 years ago or 30 years ago, and learn from each other and do better and build on each other's successes. So that's the hope here. And hopefully these sorts of conversations will continue, and people should definitely feel free to reach out to each another to ask questions and support each other, because I've found that the willingness to share amongst Northern Indigenous communities is extremely high. So we've seen that spirit here today. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks so much, Pam.
Chimigwech for that. And with that, we're going to close the session today. So Chimigwech again.